Okie dokie. It's the noontime Bible study hour. We've been covering Deuteronomy. We're now in chapter 21. The format here is that we read through an entire chapter, and then we go to John Wesley's notes on the Old Testament. And then I can't help but add my own reflections on some of this. Forgive me. But I enjoy it. I hope, I know there have been some of you hopping in and out. And you're welcome to type your thoughts to me. A couple have sent me emails, and then a couple have just said hi. But anyway, I'm interested in hearing people's reflections. And I know a lot of you are just sitting at home. You don't have anything else going on. So this is a good thing to do. I'm going to adjust this camera just a little bit. There we go. All right, so we're in chapter 21. May the Lord speak to us in this time. Oh, I was saying, I know a lot of people are sitting at home, not doing much. And I see all these articles on the news about what to do while you're bored. And like the best thing you can do is read scripture and pray. So you can get out your Bible. I'm reading King James Version because that's the version that John Wesley responds to. But, I mean, you literally have nothing better to do. You never have anything better to do than to study God's Word. So, here's chapter 21. If one be found slain in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him, then thy elders and thy judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. And it shall be that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city shall take a heifer, which hath not been wrought with, and which hath not drawn in the yoke. And the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer unto a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. And the priests, the sons of Levi, shall come near, for them the Lord thy God hath chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord. And by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. And all the elders of that city that are next unto the slain man shall wash their hands over the heifer that is beheaded in the valley. And they shall answer and say, Our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. Be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge, and the blood shall be forgiven them. So shalt thou put away the guilt of innocent blood from among you, when thou shalt do that which is right in the sight of the Lord. When thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive, and seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to thy wife, then thou shalt bring her home to thine house, and she shall shave her head, and pare her nails, P-A-R-E, pare her nails, and shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house, and bewail her father and her mother a full month, and after that thou shalt go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be thy wife. And it shall be, if thou have no delight in her, then thou shalt let her go whither she will, but thou shalt not sell her at all for money. Thou shalt not make merchandise of her, because thou hast humbled her. If a man have two wives, one beloved and another hated, and they have borne him children, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated, then it shall be, when he maketh his sons to inherit that which he hath, that he may not make the son of the beloved firstborn before the son of the hated, which is indeed the firstborn. But he shall acknowledge the son of the hated for the firstborn, by giving him a double portion of all that he hath, for he is the beginning of his strength, the right of the firstborn is his. If a man have a stubborn and rebellious son, which will not obey the voice of his father, or the voice of his mother, and that when they have chastened him will not hearken unto them, Then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him, and bring him out unto the elders of his city, and unto the gate of his place. And they shall say unto the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard. And all the men of his city shall stone him with stones, that he die. So shalt thou put evil away from among you. And all Israel shall hear and fear. And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be to be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree, his body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance. Thus ends chapter 21. Okay. The way that J.W. lines this out, the expiation of an uncertain murder is in verses 1 through 9. The usage of a captive taken to wife in verses 10 through 14. The firstborn to not be disinherited, verses 15 through 17. A stubborn son to be put to death, verses 18 through 21. And bodies of malefactors to be buried in verses 22 and 23. So starting in verse 1, J.W. points out the field, quote, If one be found slain in the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee to possess it, lying in the field, and it be not known who hath slain him. John Wesley adds, or in the city, or any place. Only the field is named as the place where such murders are most commonly committed. So I remember the story of Cain and Abel. I think I remember it stipulates that they went out into the field, and that's where it was murdered. But so the notion isn't here that you can murder in the city, and if you don't find it, then you can't cleanse your hands of the blood guilt. It's just providing the most common scenario where you find a cadaver and you just can't figure out who killed him. Usually when someone is killed, then there's blood guilt that has to be atoned for. It has to be reckoned with. The one who sheds blood, he's got to get killed as well. But whenever you have no idea who it was and you have no way to conclude what it was, this was a ceremony for cleansing your hands. Well, it looks like we're going to have several verses which talk about this. But anyway, the main point here being it's not just in the field where someone can be murdered and you don't know who done it. It can be in a city or any place. It's just while God's kingdom is established here on earth, this is how you do things to be cleansed of blood guilt. In verse 2, it talks about elders and judges, quote, Then thy elders and thy judges shall come forth, and they shall measure unto the cities which are round about him that is slain. So those of thy elders who are judges, the judges or rulers of all the neighboring cities, when it says they measure between cities, it means unless it be evident which city is nearest, for then the measuring was superfluous, which means pointless or unnecessary. But the whole point of measuring is trying to figure out in what town the inhabitant lived who killed him, I think. Verse 3, which hath not drawn the yoke, quote, And it shall be that the city which is next unto the slain man, even the elders of that city shall take a heifer. Oh, no, it's not trying to figure out where the murderer came from. It's trying to figure out what elders need to cleanse their hands. Okay, that was lost on me the first times that I read that. Which hath not been wrought, and which hath not drawn the yoke. So that means that this shall be a fit representative of the murderer in whose stead it was killed, who would not bear the yoke of God's laws. Ooh. So a yoke is a load put upon it to pull one's load for, a rancher. But the person who killed is lawless and couldn't stand the yoke of the law. So you're taking a heifer that also was never yoked, never bore a load. And, this murderer is not going to bear the load of his murder. He's not going to pay the price. So you're taking a heifer that hasn't borne a load. All right. This is a type of Christ who was under the yoke but what he had voluntarily taken upon himself. So this heifer that's killed for the sake of the murderer is akin to Jesus. This is a prefiguring of Jesus, who the heifer didn't commit the crime, but the heifer represents the one who took the crime. So he receives the penalty, the punishment that the murderer deserved. That's pretty cool. That's a good sermon. I like that, John Wesley. Verse 4, it talks about a rough valley. Quote, and the elders of that city shall bring down the heifer unto a rough valley, which is neither eared nor sown, and shall strike off the heifer's neck there in the valley. So the rough valley, that such a desert and horrid place might beget an horror of murder and of the murderer. Strike off the neck is done to show what they would and should have done to the murderer if they had found him. So the reason it stipulates a rough valley is to have this murder take place in a nasty place, because it was a nasty thing done. And then striking off the neck. I mean, any form of killing. Well, usually they would stone people to death, wouldn't they? I haven't heard decapitation depicted as a means of executing people committed of murder, but convicted of murder. In verse 5, it talks about every controversy. Quote, and the priests and the sons of Levi shall come near, for them the Lord thy God hath chosen to minister unto him, and to bless in the name of the Lord, and by their word shall every controversy and every stroke be tried. When it's talking about every controversy, JW says every controversy of this kind, every controversy which shall rise about any stroke, whether such a mortal stroke as is here spoken of, or any other stroke or wound given by one man to another. So the priests have jurisdiction over any events where someone gets hit. I think that's what he's saying. In verse 7, he picks on the phrase, they shall answer. Quote, and they shall answer and say, our hands have not shed this blood, neither have our eyes seen it. So they will answer the priests who will be examining them. And when they talk about this blood, we have not shed this blood, this about which the present inquiry is made, the blood of the murdered man, or this which is here present, for it is thought the corpse of the slain man was brought into the same place where the heifer was slain. So what JW imagines is where they kill this heifer is where they also bring the cadaver of the murdered person. Nor have we seen or understood how or by whom this was done. So here he's saying that we don't know everything about this particular ritual. In verse 8, the word forgiven, quote, be merciful, O Lord, unto thy people Israel, whom thou hast redeemed, and lay not innocent blood unto thy people of Israel's charge, and the blood shall be forgiven them. JW says, though there was no mortal guilt in the people, yet there was a ceremonial uncleanness in the land, which was to be expiated and forgiven. So here he makes a distinction between mortal guilt and ceremonial uncleanness. So I don't know the degree to which the Old Testament makes this distinction, but there was such a thing as ceremonial uncleanness that wasn't necessarily seen as morally sinful, like a woman being on her period, or a man having had sex that day, or a person having touched a cadaver. All of these things made you ceremonially unclean, but it wasn't as though women were more evil during their time of the month. So there's such a distinction as being unclean because of sins, immoral things that you've done, and being unclean just by being sick or emitting bodily fluids. So what JW is saying is this blood guilt is not a moral guilt. It would be if it was upon the murderer and they were facing the murderer, the murderer was facing his charges, but it's not a moral uncleanness, moral guilt, whenever it's just the guilt upon all the people in the land. That's just a ceremonial guilt. I don't know that that's true. I don't know how Jews would feel about JW saying that. Yeah, I don't even know that I'd agree with that. I think, yeah, well, who cares? Verse 10, enemies, quote, when thou goest forth to war against thine enemies, and the Lord thy God hath delivered them into thine hands, and thou hast taken them captive. What JW says is enemies of other nations, but not of the Canaanites. Yes, of course, because whenever they go to war with the Canaanites, they're supposed to just kill everybody, even young women. But when outside of Canaan, yeah, this applies. In verse 11, it talks about having a desire unto her, quote, and seest among the captives a beautiful woman, and hast a desire unto her, that thou wouldest have her to be thy wife. What JW says is, or hast taken delight in her, which may be a modest expression for lying with her, and it seems probable, because it is said in verse 14 that he had humbled her. And here seem to be two cases supposed, and direction given to what to do in both of them. So the first case is that he did desire to marry her, of which he speaks in verses 11 and 12 and 13, or 2, that he did not desire this, of which he speaks in verse 14. So I think what JW here is saying, odds are this is not a situation where everybody's been rounded up and you just see a young woman you desire and you desire to marry her. I think he's addressing here whenever men invade a city and they come upon women, rape just has always gone with this scenario. It's just assumed that these Hebrews have raped a woman in the city, and in that case, you don't leave her alone. You don't just leave her to fend for herself. You don't cast her off somewhere. Rather, the whole stipulation is you take her into your house, you take care of her for a bit, and then you don't pimp her out and profit off her that way. She has her own dignity, and she can be released if you don't desire to marry her after that. Was it 30 days? Just a full month, yeah. So, and then after that time, you can marry her if you want to, or not. So, verse 12, it talks about when you take her into your house, she shall shave her head, quote, then thou shalt bring her into thine home and to thine house, and she shall shave her head and pare her nails. JW says, in token of her renouncing her heathenish idolatry and superstition, and of her becoming a new woman and embracing the true religion. So here this is a form of forced conversion, I guess, making her turn her back on her old way of life. For men, circumcision was a way of entering into covenant with the Lord, but the Hebrews didn't practice female circumcision, so shaving her head, according to JW, is a way of her shedding off her old life and beginning a new life under the true religion of Yahweh. I don't know how true that is. It might be true. When men shave their heads, it's a form of beginning a vow, or at least that's a Nazirite vow. And I think it can also be a sign of mourning. That's what I took this to mean, as just a sign of mourning, letting her mourn. Maybe I'm wrong. In verse 13, it talks about the raiment of captivity. Raiment is clothing. Quote, and she shall put the raiment of her captivity from off her, and shall remain in thine house, and bewail her father and mother a full month. And after that thou shalt go in unto her, and be her husband, and she shall be thy wife. So with respect to this raiment, those sordid raiments which were put upon her when she was taken captive, so I guess there was a special captivity suit people were expected to wear or something. When it talks about bewailing her father and mother, either their death or, which was in effect the same, her final separation from them. So when the Hebrews invaded a city, they would kill anyone they wanted to. This is a surviving young woman. Odds are her parents have both been killed, at least her father. But it's possible both parents were also put into captivity. Point is, they're not going to be together anymore, so she needs a time to mourn. So, you know, us moderns, we can look on this stuff and go, oh, how awful, you know, these people were such barbarians. But really, I mean, when you look at the practices of other surrounding cultures, what's being stipulated here is Jews have to be much kinder to their captives than they have to be. Verse 14, if thou have no delight in her. What's that mean? Quote, and it shall be, if thou have no delight in her, then thou shalt let her go whither she will, but thou shalt not sell her at all for money. Thou shalt not make merchandise of her, because thou hast humbled her. So if thou have no delight in her, if thou dost not choose to marry her, you know, if you've been watching her for a month and going, oh, this chick is crazy, I don't want her to be my wife, or she smells bad, I don't know. But yeah, if you don't want her, you don't have to have her. Just because you raped her during that invasion, or, you know, I'm going to make room for the possibility that she wasn't raped, that she was just apprehended, and there's groups of captives, and some of the soldiers just say that one's pretty. I don't know why. I mean, both are reprehensible by today's standards, and I can't imagine taking joy in such. But, you know, part of the reality is that humans today are the same as humans were last year, and a lot of our sensibilities are informed not by the fact that we're any better than them. We're just culturally different from them. So, whatever. I don't know. When it talks about thou shalt not make merchandise of her, JW says, you shall not make gain of her, either by using her to thine own servile works, or by prostituting her to the lust or to the service of others. Okay, so you can't make her a slave either. You can't make her a prostitute, and you can't make her a slave. You know, it's interesting. Growing up, I never equated those two. It wasn't till seminary till it was made clear to me just how much slavery and prostitution or sexual slavery overlapped. But they do. And, you know, that's where a lot of human trafficking in the United States overlaps today. It's sex slaves brought into areas where there's lots of male workers and stuff. It's heinous. Anyway, here it's saying you can't do that to a woman. If you don't marry her, you got to set her loose. Verse 15. The scenario of two wives, quote, if a man have two wives, one beloved and another hated, and they have borne him children, both the beloved and the hated, and if the firstborn son be hers that was hated. Okay. JW says, this practice, polygamy, more than one wife, though tolerated, is not hereby made lawful, but only provision is made for the children in this case. And then he makes clear when it says that one wife is hated, he says comparatively, that means less loved. Okay, so with like Leah and Rachel were two daughters of Laban who married Jacob. Yeah, they married Jacob. Leah was not favored by Jacob. Rachel was a preferred wife. However, he didn't hate Leah. He still liked her. He just didn't like her as much as Rachel. So Reuben was the firstborn of all those kids because he ended up sleeping with the midwives of both women as well at their behest. But he ended up having 12 kids. And the firstborn was Reuben, and Reuben did get an inheritance. However, preferential treatment did go to Joseph. Anyway, he's not talking about that here. What JW talks about is how problematic it is that we do find polygamy in God's people in the Old Testament. There's been an argument going on for centuries about, is polygamy therefore acceptable because God didn't correct this cultural practice? Was God blessing it by working within it? Or did God just simply choose not to undo ancient Near Eastern culture in that way, even though it's preferable that men should not take more than one wife? And here John Wesley makes clear the practice is tolerated, but it's not made lawful. It's not made... the point here is not men should have lots of wives. The point here in this section is your children's preferential treatment. Even if you like one more than the other, there should still be a consideration for the ones you don't like as much. You know, so it's funny, we usually talk about the right of the firstborn as like a sign of a patriarchal and backward time, but here it's looking out for the rights of the firstborn when they're not preferred by the father. So it's a sense of equity rather than just the caprice of a father. In verse 19, it talks about his father and mother. Quote, "Then shall his father and his mother lay hold on him and bring him out unto the elders of the city and unto the gate of his place." So it's talking here about a disobedient young, it's probably a young man, to be honest. Women in general are just less rebellious, especially in ancient cultures like this, but even so, here in verse 19, according to JW, the consent of both father and mother is required to prevent the abuse of this law to cruelty. So if a father wants to punish his son, but the mother doesn't, then they can't do this. And the mother wants to punish and the father doesn't, likewise, you can't do it. Both parents have to be on board saying, man, this son needs to be punished. So, and it cannot be reasonably supposed that both parents would agree without the son's abominable and incorrigible wickedness, in which case it seems a righteous law, because the crime of rebellion against his own parents did so fully signify what a pernicious member he would be in the commonwealth of Israel, who had dissolved all his natural obligations. So JW's kind of blessing this, or at least explaining how it is that this can be a good thing, that a young man can be killed by his own parents. He's saying they have a civil obligation to make sure that they're not raising a child who is going to hurt God's people. So when it talks about the elders in verse 19, quote, "They shall bring them out to the elders of the city and unto the gate of the place." The elders, this was a sufficient caution to preserve children from the malice of any hard-hearted parents, because these elders were first to examine the cause with all exactness and then to pronounce the sentence. So hypothetically, it's possible that both parents would agree to bring a child to the elders and say, hey, this kid is awful, we need to kill him. But then the elders can examine and ask questions, what exactly is he doing so awful? And as they figure out more, they can actually say, you parents are really hard-hearted, this kid doesn't deserve to die. Or, it just, their job is to inquire and then give permission if it indeed needs to happen. So, it's not really a thing we do nowadays. Or at least, not with the permission of the state. In verse 20, it talks about a glutton and a drunkard. Quote, "And they shall say unto the elders of his city, This our son is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey our voice. He is a glutton and a drunkard." If you're not thinking of the prodigal son here, you need to be. JW says, "Under which two offenses others of a like or worse nature are comprehended." So I think he's saying when you hear glutton and drunkard, there are a number of other crimes against God and humanity you're supposed to imagine conflagrating here. Quote 2, the phrase "on a tree." Verse 22, "On a tree." Quote, "And if a man have committed a sin worthy of death, and he be to be put to death, and thou hang him on a tree," JW says, "which was done after the malefactor was put to death some other way, this public shame being added to his former punishment." So JW is saying they didn't kill people by hanging them. Rather, they killed them by stoning or some other method, and then they just hung the body on a tree. I always imagined a rope here, but maybe they nailed them. I don't know. I know that later translators saw this as being about Jesus. In the New Testament it gets quoted, "Cursed is he who hangs on a tree," and that comes from verse 23 here. Yeah, he is accursed of God. But anyway, the point being, this form of killing people in the West, of hanging a rope on a tree and then hanging somebody, asphyxiating them to death, he's saying that wasn't done in ancient Israel. They killed them some other method, and then they hung their body on a tree to further disrespect them. And then this law stipulates you can't leave them up there too long. All right, in verse 23, the phrase "he is accursed of God." Let's look at that again. Quote, "His body shall not remain all night upon the tree, but thou shalt in any wise bury him that day. For he that is hanged is accursed of God, that thy land be not defiled, which the Lord thy God giveth thee for an inheritance." JW says, this man who's hung from a tree, he is in a singular manner cursed and punished by God's appointment with a most shameful kind of punishment, as this was held among the Jews and all nations, and therefore this punishment may suffice for him, and there shall not be added to it that of lying unburied. And this curse is here appropriated to those that are hanged, to so signify that Christ should undergo this execrable punishment, and be made a curse for us. He's quoting Galatians 3:13 there, saying Jesus was made a curse for us, which though it was to come in respect to men, yet was present unto God. When it talks about defiled, quote, that thy land be not defiled, either by inhumanity towards the dead or by suffering the monument of the man's wickedness and of God's curse, to remain public a longer time than God would have it, whereas it should be put out of sight and buried in oblivion. That's a great word, oblivion. So the notion being that the land is defiled whenever justice is not practiced. So you're executing justice, and justice is contingent not just on punishing evildoers, but punishing them in the right way, to the right degree. So here it's saying, here's the degree to which you can punish someone guilty of all these abominable things, but you shouldn't go any further than this. You can hang them, but not for more than a day. You need to bury them, leave them be. All right, time to go on to chapter 22. I have glasses on today because it's allergy season here in Oklahoma. It's awful. My eyes get so irritated I can't wear contacts. And chewing ice helps me not be hungry. Trick my brain a little bit. All right, chapter 22. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt in any case bring them again unto thy brother. And if thy brother be not nigh unto thee, or if thou know him not, then thou shalt bring it unto thine own house, and it shall be with thee until thy brother seek after it, and thou shalt restore it to him again. In like manner thou shalt do this with his ass, and so shalt thou do with his raiment, and with all lost things of thy brothers, which he hath lost, and thou hast found, shalt thou do likewise. Thou mayest not hide thyself. Thou shalt not see thy brother's ass or his ox fall down by the way, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt surely help him to lift them up again. The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth to a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment, for all that do so are an abomination unto the Lord thy God. If a bird's nest chance to be before thee in the way in any tree, or on the ground, whether they be young ones or eggs, and the dam sitting upon the young, or upon the eggs, thou shalt not take the dam with the young. But thou shalt in any wise let the dam go, and take, when it's same dam, it's D-A-M. Let the dam go, and take the young to thee, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days. When thou buildest a new house, then thou shalt make a battlement for thy roof, that thou bring not blood upon thine house, if any man fall from thence. Thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. Thou shalt not plow with an ox and an ass together. Thou shalt not wear a garment of diverse sorts, as of a woolen and linen together. Thou shalt make thee fringes upon the four quarters of thy vesture, wherewith thou coverest thyself. If any man take a wife, and go in unto her, and hate her, and give occasions of speech against her, and bring up an evil name upon her, and say, I took this woman, and when I came to her I found her not a maid, then shall the father of the damsel and her mother take and bring forth the tokens of the damsel's virginity unto the elders of the city in the gate. And the damsel's father shall say unto the elders, I gave my daughter unto this man to wife, and he hateth her. And lo, he hath given occasions of speech against her, saying, I found not thy daughter a maid, and yet these are the tokens of my daughter's virginity. And they shall spread the cloth before the elders of the city, and the elders of that city shall take that man and chastise him. And they shall amerce him in 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel, because he hath brought up an evil name upon a virgin of Israel. And she shall be his wife. He may not put her away all his days. But if this thing be true, and the tokens of virginity be not found for the damsel, Then they shall bring out the damsel to the door of her father's house, and the men of her city shall stone her with stones, that she die, because she hath wrought folly in Israel, to play the whore in her father's house. So shalt thou put evil away from among you. If a man be found lying with a woman married to a husband, then they shall both of them die, both the man that lay with the woman and the woman. So shalt thou put away evil from Israel. If a damsel that is a virgin be betrothed unto a husband, and a man find her in city and lie with her, then ye shall bring them both out unto the gate of the city, and ye shall stone them with stones, that they die. The damsel because she cried not, being in the city, and the man because he hath humbled his neighbor's wife. So thou shalt put away evil from among you. But if a man find a betrothed damsel in the field, and the man force her and lie with her, then the man only that lay with her shall die. But unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death. For as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slayeth him, even so is this matter. For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to save her. If a man find a damsel that is a virgin, which is not betrothed, and lay hold of her, and lie with her, and they be found, then the man that lay with her shall give unto the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife, because he hath humbled her. He may not put her away all his days. A man shall not take his father's wife, nor discover his father's skirt. Thus ends the reading of that chapter. That's chapter 22. Okay. So this is divided up by laws for preserving stray or fallen cattle in verses 1 through 4, for a distinction of apparel between men and women in verse 5, for compassion even towards birds in verses 6 and 7, of battlements on houses in verse 8, against improper mixtures in verses 9 through 11, of fringes in verse 12, of a wife falsely accused of adultery in verses 13 through 19, a wife justly accused in verses 20 and 21, the punishment of adultery, rape, and fornication in verses 22 through 29, and then of incest in verse 30. In verse 1, it talks about thy brother. Quote, thou shalt not see thy brother's ox or his sheep go astray, and hide thyself from them. Thou shalt in any case bring them again unto thy brother. When it's talking about thy brother, it's saying any man. Thou shalt, it's as the following verses make clear, it says, if you don't even know who it belongs to, like how are you going to not know your brother? So when it's just talking about their countrymen, anyone in that area. When it talks about thou shalt not hide thyself, it's saying you shall not dissemble or pretend that thou dost not see them, or pass them by as if thou hadst not seen them. So I'm sure none of us have ever done this, but sometimes somebody will be in need and you'll go, I don't really want to do that, and so you just pretend you didn't see it, or you get out of sight so they don't see that you see it, so they don't ask you to help. And here it's saying that's wrong. If you can help, you should. If you see it, you should do something. All right, in verse 2, it talks about to thine own house, quote, and if thy brother be not nigh unto thee, or if thou know him not, then thou shalt bring it unto thine own house, and it shall be with thee until thy brother seek after it, and thou shalt restore it to him again. So here JW says, if this is a cow, it should be used like your own cattle. So you've just acquired new property until the actual owner comes, and then you need to give it back. In verse 3, he points out the same thing with hide thyself. This is with respect to finding somebody else's property that's not livestock. Once again, you cannot pretend that you're not there to help. You have to help. And he also makes clear you can't conceal the thing lost. Okay, so verse 5, there's a phrase, shall not wear, quote, The woman shall not wear that which pertaineth unto a man, neither shall a man put on a woman's garment. For all that do so are abomination unto the Lord thy God. Namely, ordinarily or unnecessarily. For in some cases this may be lawful, as to make an escape for one's life. Now this is forbidden, both for decency's sake, that men might not confound those sexes which God hath distinguished, that all appearance of evil might be avoided, such change of garments carrying a manifest sign of effeminacy in the man, of arrogancy in the woman, of lightness and petulancy in both, and also to cut off all suspicions and occasions of evil, which this practice opens a wide door to. So in our era, where gender theory has really, we're saying that gender is a social construct and not at all connected to chromosomes or genitals. We've completely undone the weight of this, but scripturally there is a great concern with women looking and behaving like women and men looking and behaving like men, because if those clear distinctions are not made and retained, then there will be a lot of situations that come up which do not glorify God. And I think we're seeing that in the contemporary context. It's not as though everything was perfect whenever men and women were better and more easily distinguished, but as we continue to blur the lines, we continue to see all kinds of lines crossed that shouldn't be crossed. So whatever, we don't need to get into that right now, but a lot of people don't know that that's a concern enumerated in the Bible, but it is. In verse 7, let the dam go, quote, but thou shalt in any wise let the dam go, and take the young to thee, that it may be well with thee, and that thou mayest prolong thy days. So what J.W. says is partly for the bird's sake, which suffered enough by the loss of its young, for God would not have cruelty exercised towards the brute creatures, and partly for the men's sake, to refrain the greediness, that they should not monopolize all to themselves, but leave the hopes of a future seed for others. You know what? I think I probably disagree. You know, just as it's 2 chapters ago, it said, when you raise up siege works against a city, don't cut down the fruit trees, because those trees provide fruit and they keep men alive, and it's for the future. Likewise, here in the Bible, it's saying you can kill the babies, kill the eggs, or the baby chicks, but let the mom go free. And here J.W. is saying it's because he's compassionate and she suffered enough by losing her kids. Don't kill her on top of it. But man, if you've lost a child, it's almost a favor to kill you, to know that pain. That's one thing. And then secondly, she's going to go and make more eggs, and these men are going to be able to come and find those and take those from her too. So this doesn't seem like a compassionate thing to me, but maybe I'm missing something. I just hear the code here saying, let her go so she can make you more food later. It's a good long-term investment. All right, verse 8, a battlement. Quote, when thou buildest a new house, then thou shalt make a battlement for thy roof, that thou bring not blood upon thine house, if any man fall from thence. So, J.W. says, a fence or breastwork, because the roofs of their houses were made flat, that men might walk on them. All right, so build a fence around the edge of your roof so someone can't fall off if they're up there walking on it. When it says in verse 8 that thou bring not blood upon thine house, what that means, according to J.W., is the guilt of blood by a man's fall from the top of your house through your neglect of this necessity provision. The Jews say that by the equity of this law they are obliged, and so are we, to fence or remove everything whereby life may be endangered, as wells or bridges, lest if any perish through our omission, their blood be required at our hand. Okay, yeah, that's a good modern application. I've got a place over by my house that's unguarded that my kids can fall into, and anytime we're close, I go crazy. Which one might say, well, don't get close then. And I say, we got to walk around the block. But Maybe I'm wrong. In verse 9, it talks about diverse seeds. Quote, thou shalt not sow thy vineyard with diverse seeds, lest the fruit of thy seed which thou hast sown and the fruit of thy vineyard be defiled. And here he has two things. What diverse seeds can mean is, one, with diverse kinds of seeds mixed and sowed together between the rows of vines in thy vineyard, which was forbidden to be done in the field, according to Leviticus 19:19, and here in the vineyard. Or, second application, with any kind of seed differing from that of the vine, which would produce either herbs or corn or fruit-bearing trees, whose fruit might be mingled with the fruit of the vines. Now this and the following precepts, though in themselves small and trivial, are given according to that time and state of the church for instructions in greater matters, and particularly to commend to them simplicity and all their carriage toward God and man, and to forbid all mixture of their inventions with God's institutions in doctrine and worship. When it talks about that they be not defiled legally and morally, JW says, as being prohibited by God's law, and therefore made unclean. As on the contrary, things are sanctified by God's word, allowing and approving them. That's a 1 Timothy quote, New Testament. So the concern in this passage with seeds, as well as in following passages about mixing things, is that Wesley doesn't talk about it as clearly as I've heard it talked about, where there's a concern in the Old Testament, and here he says reflected in the church, that things remain pure, that there is not an admixture of light and dark, good and bad, or even just different things. There are ways in which we're expected to promote purity that symbolize our purity. It's an external way of doing things that represent an internal, essential way of being in the world. The way he says it applies to the church is that God wants to commend simplicity in our carriage towards God and man, and to forbid all mixture in our inventions with God's institutions of doctrine or worship. So we need to keep our doctrine and worship pure, and we need to be simple. That's how he interprets this seed bit. In verse 10, it talks about not mixing an ox and an ass, or having them work together. Quote, because the one was a clean beast, the other unclean, whereby God would teach men to avoid polluting themselves by the touch of unclean persons or things. So an ox was clean, an ass is not, I guess. And I guess because they don't chew the cud. They have to be cloven hoof, chew the cud, and then there was a third thing. Or maybe there was only two, I forget. In verse 12, talks about fringes. Quote, thou shalt make thee fringes upon the four quarters of thy vesture, wherewith thou shalt cover thyself. Here, JW says, or laces or strings, partly to bring the commands of God to their remembrance, as it is expressed in Numbers 15:38, and partly as a public profession of their nation and religion, whereby they might be distinguished from strangers, that so they might be more circumspect to behave as became the people of God, and that they should own their religion before all the world. It's kind of like when people put the ichthus, the Jesus fish, on the back of their car. Ideally, that's supposed to help them remember that they're supposed to drive like Christians. Other people can see that they're Christians. Hopefully, they don't have road rage like other people, So that's the positive side of this. The negative side is in context of persecution. It can be like a Star of David in Nazi Germany, where Jews were made to reveal themselves for who they were. When it talks about thou coverest thyself in verse 12, quote, wherewith thou coverest thyself, these words seem restrictive to the upper garment wherewith the rest were covered. So this Jewish way of dressing with fringes on your quarters, the four quarters of thy vesture, that deals only with the upper garment, not the lower garment. Quote, in verse 13, if any man take a wife, quote, if any man take a wife and go in unto her and hate her, JW says, and afterward falsely accuse her. What the meaning of that evidence is by which the accusation was proved false, the learned are not agreed. Nor is it necessary for us to know, for they whom this law was intended undoubtedly understood it. So I think what JW is saying here is in this whole scenario where a man is coupled with a woman, he gets married to her, he has sex with her at least once. If he decides he doesn't like her, he starts making public accusations against her that she was not a virgin when they got married. Then there's this procedure lined out where the parents supposedly have some objects that prove her virginity prior to the wedding night. And I think JW is saying a lot of smart people have argued about what this evidence would be, what the protocol was for getting this evidence, and we don't know. And then he says, it really doesn't matter though, because we're not doing it, and people back then knew what it meant, so we don't have to know what it meant. And I'm fine with that. In the most recent season of Marco Polo on Netflix, they depict a ritual whereby a woman's virginity is proven prior to marriage. And it's interesting and disturbing. Verse 19, it talks about the father, quote, and they shall immerse him in 100 shekels of silver, and give them unto the father of the damsel, because he hath brought up an evil name upon a virgin in Israel, and she shall be his wife, and he may not put her away all his days. So when it talks about the father, it's talking about the father of the accused woman, the woman who's accused falsely. Because this accusation was a reproach to his family, the father's family, and to himself, as such a miscarriage of his daughter would have been ascribed to his evil education. So yeah, the accusation is made that his daughter was a loose woman prior to her marriage. This is an accusation not just against her, but against her father, who failed to inculcate good values into her. So that's why the husband of the wife has to compensate the father of his wife that money. And some people would say, well, he should compensate his wife. Well, they didn't have separate finances back then. So yeah, he could give her 100 shekels and then it would come right back. All right, verse 24 deals with this situation where the woman cried not, where she had sex with a woman within the city and it's discovered later. So JW says if this happened, she was raped in the city and she didn't cry out, therefore it is justly presumed that she consented to it. That, in case that's not clear, the assumption is that if a woman were to be raped, she would cry out. That's something that pretty much every culture assumed until modern day culture, where there have been a number of women who had sex against their will or didn't feel good about it while it was going on, and they didn't cry out. We have a different understanding of what rape is today than what ancient peoples did. Ancient peoples understood that when a woman was raped, she cried out. And that's why they make the distinction between in the city and in the field. In the city, if she was raped and she cried out, that's a cut and dry case. That man's going to get killed. If it turns out they had sex and it's revealed later and it was in a city and she didn't cry out, somebody would have heard it, then she consented to adultery. Verse 26, the phrase, even so, quote, but unto the damsel thou shalt do nothing. There is in the damsel no sin worthy of death. For as when a man riseth against his neighbor and slayeth him, even so is this matter. This is one of the cool things about this ancient Jewish law. You know, there are a lot of ancient cultures that would have said when a woman is raped, even if she didn't consent to it, she's impure, she's unclean, we got to get rid of this gal. She's a shame to her father, any future husband. Here it says no, nothing bad. Something bad was done to her. However, she is not bad. She didn't do anything wrong. She should not bear any shame. That's pretty great. Verse 27, it deals with a situation where the damsel cried, quote, "For he found her in the field, and the betrothed damsel cried, and there was none to save her." So it's dealing with a woman who's not yet fully married, but she's betrothed, and ancient Jews looked at this like she was married. But here, it's dealing with this situation. JW says this is the case to be presumed, that if it was out in the field that she did cry out, charity obliging us to believe the best till the contrary be manifest. So someone might say, hey, she could have consented out in the field, and we just don't know it because nobody was there to witness. JW is saying, be charitable in your assumptions. Don't just assume women are hussies. Assume that this was a virtuous woman. Verse 29, 50 shekels, quote, "Then the man that lay with her shall give unto the man's damsel, the damsel's father 50 shekels of silver, and she shall be his wife because he hath humbled her. He may not put her away all his days." So this is saying when in the situation where there's a young woman who's not married or betrothed and she gets raped by a man, then these 50 shekels, besides the dowry, that's JW now saying, besides the dowry, as Philo, the learned Jew, notes. So there was a Egyptian Jew contemporary with Paul in the New Testament who stipulated that there should always be a dowry as well. A dowry is a bride price that gets paid. Sometimes from, well, I'm not entirely clear on it. But besides the dowry, as Philo the learned Jew notes, which is here omitted because that was customary, it being sufficient here to mention what was particular to this case. And then with respect to the marriage, JW says, if her father consented to it. So there's still a contingency where a guy rapes a girl and the father says, nope, y'all aren't getting married. This is not okay. Because the assumption here seems to be they had sex, it didn't matter. If she didn't want it, it doesn't matter how the father feels about it. They have to get married now. And JW is saying, no, they can still not get married. I wish it stipulated that here. I would like to believe that. Here it does seem just automatic. There's a story in Genesis where one daughter, I think her name was Dinah, got raped by a guy in a field who fell in love with her and then sought out Jacob, her father, to see if he could marry her. And Jacob and his sons were so mad about it that two of his sons went in and killed the whole city of men of the guy who did it. It's a crazy story. All right, final verse. A man shall not take his father's wife nor discover his father's skirt. When it says take, it means to wife. So this respects the state, and the next branch speaks of the act only. So JW is saying when it talks about shall not take his father's wife, he's saying you shall not marry your father's wife. And then when it says nor discover his father's skirt, that means just have sex with your father's wife, whether it should be your mother or stepmother. Okay. I wondered if it meant you should not. In Genesis, it talks about how Noah passed out drunk, and one of his sons sinned against him. Which son was that? That was the father of Ham. Ham sinned against him by just looking at him. And then it's a question of what it means when he looked at him or he saw him. Because there could have been something sexual happen. Anyway, I wonder if this infers something sexual between a man and his father. Ugh. You know, we live in a world where weird stuff like that has always happened. We just learn about it sometimes. So anyway, I hate to end on a note like that, but that's where that chapter ends. So anyway, God bless everybody as you make your way through the text. I've been having fun, so I'll be doing this again for dinner time this evening at 5:30. Be well, friends.